I'll never get used to that. So City Mission, 40 years of City Mission. I believe it's something to celebrate. If you don't know anything about City Mission, hopefully you will in a few minutes. We're based in Woodend. We run about 12 projects at any time. And we try to identify where the need is. It might be completely practical, like food bank. It might be something like our cafe, which is pay what you can afford, which has grown from serving about 30 people in a 2-hour lunch when we came back October before last after COVID, to most days the cafe's open. It now serves about 70 in 2 hours. So if you wonder why Andy's getting shorter every time you see it, it's because we need to buy some skates or something, because Andy helps in the cafe. It could be something more social. On a Monday, we have our senior lunch club. When if I ask most of them, they could happily cook a meal at home, but actually it's about coming together. It's about not being stuck at home. It's about talking to people. It's about their mental health. It is a great group of people. They were the most keen to keep going during COVID. They were the most desperate to come back after COVID. And they're just an absolute riot. But they're a little family. And it's a bit like Barbara's group in the way you support each other and love each other. We have a men's group called the Mafia, City Mission Mafia. Men in Faith in Action is what Mafia stands for. And again, we see people go on trips and have a great time. But also we now have a weekly men's breakfast. And it's amazing to see guys who probably don't know how to talk to each other, how to be honest and open about feelings and emotions, kind of going, I really feel part of this. I really feel like I'm part of a family. Andy walks in sometimes and the first thing they say, you know, you're a woman, get out. But it's because they own it and they feel safe. And if I'm honest, I don't like men's groups. I don't like same-sex groups. And I had a real assumption about what they were going to be like. But I hear so many people telling real stories of where they're at. And it's probably because they're in that group where they can, you know, men are good shoulder to shoulder, aren't we? We're good doing things. So when they're sitting together eating a bacon sandwich, they talk. I assumed it was all going to be football and, you know, smutty jokes and things like that. Do you know the one biggest thing they talk about at the moment? Air fryers. They are obsessed with air fryers. I've got a guy in his early 80s going, every morning I've got my air fryer on. I'm like, just get a grip. Just get it. But it's brilliant because they're like a little family and they're sharing recipes. It's like Mother's Union, but different. So you can see the mission tries to identify where people's need is. We have opportunities to share people practically and instantly with food, with you know, the shop, with a bike from a project we run where people come and get secondhand bikes from us and things like that. But also we have a chance to share Jesus with people. We've had a guy very recently who I got to do his dad's funeral. I'll mention it in a little while. But when I was planning his dad's funeral, they're not a Christian family, and they asked me to do it. And I said, you know, I'm a Christian, don't you? And they went, first thing this guy said to me, first time I ever met him, well, we don't want any of that religious rubbish. I thought, oh, this could be fun. And then they said, but we would like this reading, which was from the Bible, these hymns, and you don't mind doing some prayers, do you? And I think, okay, yeah, I won't do any of that Christian stuff. Don't worry about it. About 3 weeks ago, we started a thing called Easter Chat, which was an opportunity for people who thought they knew about the Easter story to come together and just literally chat it through and learn a few things. And he came because his mum's a volunteer and his mum challenged him to come. And he said he came in and he sat like this. You think I'm a big fella. He's wide. He's bigger than me. He's solid. He used to be a bouncer. And he just sat with his arms folded. You can see it was like, this is a load of rubbish. Last week we gave him an NIV study Bible because he's read all the Gospels now and he wants to see how it all relates to Isaiah and Genesis, and he's become a totally different person. And he said to me 3 weeks ago, I thought it was rubbish. But then Sarah said this, and then she gave me this piece of paper, and then this, and now it's fascinating. He's driving his family mad. He was up apparently at 5 o'clock the other morning, and somebody was up awake because he was awake, and the first thing he said was, in John's Gospel it says, and like, oh, for goodness sake. So we get to be practical, but also we get to be the heart of Jesus. And what I wanted to do is just come around some churches and explain some of the amazing things that happened at the mission. Because of God, it's nothing to do with us. We're just the ones he gets to use to do some of this stuff. And to inspire you maybe, what is God saying after COVID in our communities? Because the interesting thing I find is we go around more and more churches. Churches are smaller than they used to be. Churches are working differently to how they used to be. There's less young people than there used to be. But actually, God has got a plan. I think God has got something new for us all, but we need to be ready for it. So let's have a little bit of context. If I said what was happening 40 years ago, you'd probably struggle to know, because we celebrate big birthdays, don't we, with a 0-1, but we don't always know what was happening back at the start. So I want to just give you a couple of things. So the mission is 40 years old. It existed before the fall of the Berlin Wall. It existed before the creation of the International Space Station, which sits up there in space and circles the Earth. Many of us will remember the biggest concert ever, Live Aid. The mission was around before that. The mission is older than EastEnders. Not Coronation Street, but it's older than EastEnders. It's older than The Simpsons. It's older than Google, Facebook, and Instagram. It's older than all of those things. It started life in the back of a car. It worked from somebody's flat that was lent out to them, and for the most part in a very old building based in Woodend. And in case you don't know, Woodend is probably one of the most disadvantaged communities in the whole country, not just in Coventry. And so to help us work our way through the next few minutes, I've got 5 different headings. Terry will be proud of me. 5 headings, all start with the same letter. He's trained me well. They all start with P, and it's about God's story at City Mission. So the first thing I want to offer you is that God prepares. Romans 8:28, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Last week when Bob was here, it's interesting, Bob and I don't get to see each other very often because he's always somewhere, I'm always somewhere. But last week he came straight to me at the back and wanted to come over and say something. And it's because he'd heard about the 40-year celebration. And he reminded me that he was part of the prayer before City Mission existed. He was part of the conversation. He was part of, as were many people, the preparation for City Mission to arrive. And it blows my mind that more than 40 years ago, God called people from all over the city and from obviously from Birmingham and other places as well to start thinking about, start praying about what about having a Coventry City Mission. Individuals who didn't necessarily know each other, but people who had a heart for this sort of work. Historically, there were about 600 missions in the UK. Nearly every city and town had a church called The Mission, but they started to disappear as churches changed buildings or changed name, and then charities replaced the churches. And now there's about 13, 14 city missions around the country. But there are city missions all over the world. It's amazing how many people come back and go, oh, I found a city mission in Brisbane or in New Delhi or all over the place. And many of them do amazing work, but all very different work depending on the need in that community, in that city. And so, more than 40 years ago, God started to prepare a team. He started to prepare the idea of City Mission. Where could it be? How could we do it? They talked to Birmingham City Mission. They talked to Bob. They talked to others and said, how can we do this differently? What does Coventry need? And then God breathed into it. And I think that's the important thing. We can talk, we can pray, we can plan, we can prepare, but it's when God breathes into it, it comes to life. And 40 years ago, God breathed into City Mission. And we can tell you time and time again of different times when God prepared us in ways that make no sense. Sarah, who some of you met during the Life Expo earlier in the year, Sarah goes to Queen's Road Baptist Church. She's somebody we knew. She volunteered with us. And then when Helen, who was our family worker at the time, left, God said, write a job description, but write it for Sarah White. I'm like, what? Come on, you need to write a job description, but it's for Sarah White. I said, well, why would Sarah White want a job at the mission? And God said, just do it. So I wrote a job description, which for a 4-month job. It wasn't for a permanent job. It was just for 4 months, from September to Christmas. And I wrote it with this person, Sarah White, in mind. I'd only met Sarah about 3 or 4 times at that point, didn't know if she wanted a job, didn't know if she'd be any good at it. Guess who the only person was that applied? God prepared. It turned out Sarah had been talking to her husband, saying, I think I want to go back to work now the children are older. I think I'd like to do some maybe Christian work. I'd like to do some different, but I don't know. I'd like something that's only a short-term thing so I could try. God prepared. Many of our projects are formed in the same way, that somebody will come and say, have you thought of, or God's been saying this to me. Please don't do that today. I'm a bit tired after last night, to be honest. But it's amazing how many of our projects started by somebody in a congregation. People assume it's always from the people that are running the place. But actually, the best ideas usually come from a group of people who have been praying or thinking or what about. So please keep praying for us. People being nudged to start or suggest a new project. What's God saying to you today? For City Mission, for APEC, for yourself? Is God preparing us for something new, a new season? You know, we're just coming out of winter. Hopefully, we're going into spring. We're now, I think, officially in spring because Ollie's had a birthday, which is on the first day of spring. Is God preparing us for a new season? I believe God prepares. The second thing, God provides. Philippians 4:19. And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. As you can imagine, running a charity recently has been tough. Most of our income comes from the church plate or church donations or individuals. And it's been a tough old time because none of us have been working. We've all been furloughed or stuck at home. We haven't been able to have collections in churches. And it's been a tough time. But all the way through it, we were confident that God would provide. At the beginning of COVID, it's really weird if any of you have got the app on your phone called Time Hop that reminds you of things that you posted years ago. Just last week, Andy and I started to find things that were posted on Facebook about the lockdown and how it's all started. It was 3 years ago. And at that point, I really panicked and thought, I'm not sure the mission's going to survive because we run on a tight budget. But God, said, don't be silly, Darren, I've got it under control. And we know that God provides. But it comes with prayer. It comes with a relationship. And that's why we're asking you all, when you think of us, to pray for us. I've told you before the story of right at the beginning of my time, it was really tough at the mission, and we closed the mission for a day of prayer. We prayed in every room. We prayed in every project because it looked like we were really in real financial trouble. And on the same day, we had a guy who used to come and do our accounts. He used to come in about once a month to do salaries and all the bills and things like that. And he'd already warned me that month was going to be tight. And we'd had that conversation of, do you know what? Pay everybody else. But if you can't pay me, don't worry. We'll find something, we'll find a way. And he was okay. He says, it does look tight. I can't promise. I'm like, okay. So while we're going around praying, he's in his little counting house, paying everything off. And then we got about halfway around and he came and he stood behind me and he went, £1. Started going through my pockets trying to find him £1. I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. He said, no, £1. I said, well, what are you talking about? We're praying. He said, well, give thanks because when we paid everything, there was £1 left. And I thought, I can trust the God of £1. We trust in the God that provides, don't we? And if he provides us a little bit more as a treat, that's lovely. But we know we can trust in him. If he'd given us £1 million, I'd have been going, what are we going to spend it on? But actually he left us with £1, so we can still trust in him. We had a new roof. We started ripping off the roof with only £4,000 raised. The roof was going to cost more than £100,000. And on the same day, we physically ripped the roof open. A cheque came through for £150,000 from a legacy of a man I've never met. God provides. And I believe if we prepare, if we're willing to step out for him, if God breathes life into something, why wouldn't he provide? So I want to encourage you today that if you feel God is preparing you for something, if God is preparing here for something, then he will provide if it's his will. Even something as simple as a bike. We had a situation just after COVID where a guy had phoned and said, I hear you give out second-hand bikes. I've just got a job. The job's in a warehouse. It's before the shop's open, so I need a bike to get there. My bike was stolen. Can you help? And I made a phone call to the guy who usually gets us the bike. He says, yeah, I'll send the bike over. And we arranged for this guy to come across on the bus. He lived the other side of the city, to come across on the bus, and then he was going to cycle home. And this was going to happen on the day the bike arrived. The bike arrived, and it looked like something out of Steptoe's yard. There was no way I was going to let him get on that bike. It was not safe. But we knew he was already on the bus. And we were like, what are we going to do? We've got to do something. Within minutes, a car pulled into our car park, full of stuff for the shop, clothes, bric-a-brac, all that sort of stuff. And he said, oh, when we've cleared all this, by the way, there's a brand new bike at the bottom if you want that. God provides. So when I told him there was a guy coming right now to collect it, he was blown away. That bike had sat in his garage unused for about 5 years. So we checked the tyres. The guy walked into the building. We showed him a brand new bike and he rode away. God provides. Third thing, if God prepares and God provides, then also God pursues. Ezekiel 34:11, for this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. I often talk about the mission as a place of outreach. We've talked about that guy who we've given a Bible to, or the people we gave food to, or the people we pray with. But if I'm honest, it's also a place of inreach, a place of safety, not only for the customers, but for the volunteers, for the staff, for the trustees. It's one of those places where we just get to just bless people. It's a real sanctuary, a place where people can feel at home. As I said, that guy in the men's breakfast who feels like it's his thing. He's only in his 20s, can't read or write a thing, really struggles with life, but has joined the men's breakfast and he went, oh, I love coming to this. I feel part of it. I think isn't that brilliant? So God pursues us. God knows what we need. We might try and hide our emotions, our needs, our issues, but God knows. Open ourselves up to God. Hold on to everything with an open hand. I could tell you story after story of different people who we see that in. But I'll tell you a story of Harry. I may have told you Harry's story before. Some of you probably met Harry. Harry turned up at the mission probably about 10 years ago. He came past because we got weeds at the front of the building, and he used to work in parks and gardens at the city council. He was retired and he said, I noticed your weeds. Do you have anybody to do your weeding? I'm like, well, there's weeds there, so no. And he was like, would you like me to do it? I'm never going to say no to somebody who wants to come and do weeding. So Harry came in and started doing some weeding, and he was there for a few days and he made a good job. And I noticed at that point that when I went, oh, thanks, Harry, you're amazing. He got one of the big puffer jackets on, you know, the ones that make you like even bigger than me. And I went, thanks, Harry, and hugged him. The thing with puffer jackets, when you do that, all the air's got to come out somewhere. And at that point, I noticed Harry had a bit of a falling out with deodorant. Harry smelled bad. Harry knew he smelled bad. Harry didn't care for himself at all. Harry had no teeth whatsoever. He told me he tried dentures once. They weren't for him, was the phrase he said. So he had no teeth. He really smelled bad. And if any of you remember, was it Max Wall that had the straight hair here, but nothing on top? It was a bit like that. His hair was white, but because he didn't care for himself, he didn't wash his hair, it was just solid. It was just grease. And if it grew too long, it started to curl up really prettily at the end. The reason I'm telling you about Harry is because Harry would come all the time. He felt safe with us. He felt loved by us. And nearly every day, the volunteers in the shop, a group of retired ladies would say, Harry, you need a haircut. And Harry's response would be, I know I need a haircut. And then they'd see him the next day and his hair would be a little bit long. And it went on for so long that one day I was walking down our corridor by the cafe towards the shop as I saw one of our older ladies walk out with a chair. No. Why is a 94-year-old lady walking into the car park with a chair? But it's the mission, anything could happen. And so I just kind of watched, and behind her was another one of the volunteers with a sheet. I'm like, what on earth is going on? Behind her was Harry being frog-marched into the car park by two volunteers and a pair of scissors. They sat him in the middle of the car park on the chair, wrapped the sheet round him and cut his hair. Who would be mortified? I know I would be. Harry, without the teeth, had the biggest smile I'd ever seen. They cut his hair into a nice little bob and then sent him back in. And I said to Harry, "You okay?" He said, yeah, fine. I said, "You're not embarrassed?" He said, "No, it was brilliant." That's when you're embarrassed that everybody was looking at you and kind of laughing. He went, "Well, no, because they clearly love me." Sometimes having your hair cut, sometimes having your feet washed, sometimes people standing out for you, doing something different for you, taking a risk on your behalf, shows God's love to people. So I believe not only does God prepare, God provide, but God pursues us. Is God calling you to pursue somebody today, or is God still grabbing hold of you? Is God reminding you of the love he has for you? Fourth thing, we're nearly there. God protects. Psalm 91, whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, and my God in whom I trust. While I say that the mission is a lovely place and the Woodend is much better than it was, and it is, it's still risky. It's still, on occasion, dangerous. The majority of our customers and clients are absolutely brilliant, and I would trust them as much as I would trust all of you. Read into that what you want. I just realised it didn't sound so good. And most of the situations we find ourselves in are fine. The difference between somewhere like Woodend and here is that we probably all have the same problems, but we're all better at hiding it. I think when you've maybe live in this sort of life, this sort of community, our sort of backgrounds, you kind of learn to kind of just tuck it away. And I don't know which is better, because in Woodend and in communities like that, they live with everything on their sleeve. You know everything. We know of a current situation at the mission where there's lots of people falling out and they'll sit in the cafe and you can see two sides of the room like, but they deal with it. And then 5 minutes later, it's all sorted. But because of that, sometimes it's a challenge. But I want you to think of the people we work with. Take away some of the things that we take for granted. Access to money. Not just access to money because you've got some money, but actually access to money. A few weeks ago, the bank card Andy and I used stopped working. We could no longer go boop and pay for something and forget that you paid for it. It didn't matter how many times you did that, it wasn't going to work. And didn't put it in and said, no, that wasn't going to work either. And all of a sudden we thought, hang on a minute, how do we get money? Our nearest bank is in Solihull. I hadn't got enough petrol to get to Solihull. I hadn't got enough money to buy petrol. And suddenly I realised what it's like for some of our clients. Now, sometimes you hear of stories of people coming from Fosal, walking from Fosal to get a food parcel because they couldn't afford the bus. Or, they get into massive debt because they don't have access to money, and it just spirals downhill. So what if you don't have access to money? What if you don't have a background in education? Whatever individuals might think of their time at school, I can promise most of you had a better time than many of our guys do. Not because the schools have failed them, but because the system fails. Many of them, like the guy I just mentioned, have really poor literacy. So therefore, when they get a 40-page document to fill in for benefits, or when they're told, as you may have heard at the moment, when we vote in May, we can only vote if we've got photo ID. None of our clients will have photo ID. All of a sudden, the small world gets a bit smaller. What if you haven't got support from the family or the community? All of a sudden, your outlook changes. You take risks sometimes. You do things that maybe you don't want to do, but you're so scared of what the world is about you. You take risks. So we've had break-ins. We had 3 break-ins in 10 days. You'll remember a few years ago. We've had arson attempts. We've had vandalism. We've had physical threats and more. Just a few weeks ago, we do cafe church on a Thursday morning. Terry and the Claspers and others come across sometimes. And we can't have kit on walls because they'll break in and nick it because they're desperate. So we bring everything out, we put it all out, and then we take it all back when we're finished. And a few Thursdays ago, we do it kind of like a chain. So somebody will bring it so far and so on and on. And we put it all away. And the next time we've got it out, we went, where did you put the television? Well, we brought it all back. And we worked out that somewhere in the chain, somebody had seen the television and out the door it went because they were desperate. So God protects, because there has been some sticky situations, but we believe God's in control. God will protect us when we're doing his work in his way. Every day, our family and many of the mission pray for that armour of God that Jonathan spoke about a few weeks ago. That sense of us collectively putting on the armour of God, that protection, so that we may do God's work in his place. And the final one, God promises. Hebrews 10:23, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. We know, who trust in him, that he will never leave us or forsake us. We know we can thank him for what's happened, and that's what we're doing. We can give thanks for today, and we can trust him for what's coming. Whether we're going through really tough times, whether we're going through great times, we can trust in him. There's a church across the other side of the city at the moment who've just, a couple of years ago, completed work similar to this, transforming the church, but they've only done half the job, and they're trusting God for the other half to come soon. I remember years ago, Andy's granddad lived over in Lowestoft on the East Coast, and he went to a little chapel smaller than this, and we went one time to visit him. There had these grand plans on the wall of this amazing chapel that was to be built. And you look out at the congregation, and the chances of any of them being alive when that was built were pretty zero. But they all had faith that God promised that would happen. And they were all fundraising, they were all giving, and they were all praying for God's next plan. And that's what we're doing in the mission. We believe God is challenging us to move forward. Before COVID, we wanted to open a pay what you can hairdressers, because we believe if you can't pay for food, you probably can't have a haircut. And so they do each other's hair, and most of them look absolutely dreadful. Or they don't do it at all, and they look like Harry. And so we want to open a pay what you can hairdressers, and we're nearly there. So please pray for that. We want to open a community garden, because we all know, how many times do we see Mike out the front doing the weeding? Makes me smile when he's doing the weeding anyway, because it means I haven't got to do it. But actually we get out there, we do gardening, we do stuff, and we learn that actually being outside is good for our mental health. We talk to each other. And in places like Woodend, the gardens are quite big, and they're usually just full of grass or junk. What if we teach them how to grow vegetables so that their bills go down and they can eat healthy? So that's some of the plans we've got going forward. And then we hope, as I say, to put these two workers into 2 different places as well. So what's it all about? I just want you to pray. If you get a chance to think of us every now and then, take one of our packs, if you don't already receive from the mission, and stick it somewhere. I know somebody used to put all of that, so all the stuff they wanted to pray for on the back of the toilet door, because I think that's where they spent most of their time. But wherever you think of us, by the kettle, by the toilet door, anywhere you think, actually in the Bible, where you think you might see it every now and then, pop it. And if you remember, pray for us. Pray for provision, pray for protection, pray for volunteers, but most of all, pray for our clients and customers. That not only can we offer them the practical help of food and stuff like that, but also we can offer them the love and forgiveness of Jesus. Amen. Okay, final song time.